Good evening and welcome to another edition of Centered to the Left. My name is Storm Waters. I am an Earth First activist with Cold Mountain Cold Rivers here in Missoula, as well as a number of other environmental, eco-indigenous, and human rights organizations. Tonight's topic here on Centered to the Left is going to be Native intelligence and eco-indigenous issues. This is something that I spend a considerable amount of my time working with. I operate in this realm considerably. It is unfortunate that we do not have any indigenous people on this particular edition to talk about this with us, so I'm going to do the best I can as a rather poor but functioning substitute. Hopefully in the future we will see indigenous people and other people on the Centered to the Left program to bring us more of these kinds of subjects, more of this kind of subject matter. I think they would do a much better job than I would. Today's show we have several segments of interviews and video footage that was obtained in my work and other people's work with indigenous people around the globe. We will start out with video footage and music and a little bit of the situation that the Penang Dayak people of Malaysia, specifically the Sarawak province of Malaysia, are dealing with in their efforts at halting the destruction of the rainforest, which they call home, at the hands of multinational timber companies. This is tropical hardwood rainforest, and these timber companies are coming in and removing the forests, shipping them to places like China and Japan and North America and Europe, and totally subverting and debasing a subsistence-based traditional indigenous culture that the Penang Dayak and other Dayak tribes of the region have enjoyed for many thousands of years. And the gist of this program this evening is to discuss the native perspectives on these issues and on these problems, and realize that what we're looking at is, with the destruction of these ecosystems, with the destruction of these forests, also comes the destruction of these indigenous cultures, this indigenous wisdom, and that is a loss that will probably cost us all in a very short period of time. We will then proceed to a discussion with Chief Tiny Man Heavy Runner of the Blackfeet Brave Dog Society. Cold Mountain Cold Rivers has worked extensively with Tiny Man Heavy Runner and the Blackfeet traditionalists in their quest at keeping their culture alive. You may be aware, you may remember that the Blackfeet are instrumental in the resistance against development of the Badger 2 medicine for mining, drilling, and other exploitative commercial multinational interests. And then we will go on to some discussion with one Mary Jane Newey of the Innu Indian tribe. The Innu Indians inhabit the Quebec-Labrador Peninsula, one of the harshest climates in the world. The land, which to them they call Natasanan, which means our land, is under assault from multinational mining, logging, hydroelectric, and military-industrial interests. And again, the Innu are a subsistence-based culture, in this case an Aboriginal hunting culture. They live very, very closely to the land, and they harbor a very unique wisdom and perspective about the workings of the ecosystems in Natasanan. And again, this culture is being subverted by multinational, exploitative, commercial, capitalist interests. And with the devastation of their culture is the devastation of the wisdom that the Innu possess regarding the land that they have inhabited for 10,000 years or more. Okay, we will open at this point with a segment from a video that Cold Mountain Cold Rivers did back in 1992. It's entitled SOS Sarawak, and it covers the resistance of the Penang Dayak, and to a lesser extent other tribes, to the infiltration and invasion by multinational logging firms that are coming in and devastating the rainforest that the Penang Dayak call home.
What can I tell you that you do not know? That sitting here, home in Montana after 2 years away, Borneo is a dream of green, of insects honking like car horns, of rain like cataracts, of beautiful people who put a hand into yours as if placing the world's last butterfly, fallen and dazed, back on a leaf. that these people once hunted heads and so were famous, that head hunting is irrelevant now and will not be mentioned again, that their land is being taken away bit by bit, the length and breadth of Sarawak, North Borneo, that their rainforest, the oldest in the world, is being cut, that they stand in feathered hats, earlobes stretched to the breasts, spears and blowpipes in hand in front of Japanese bulldozers. May I tell you that right now on foot-polished hardwood porches far upriver, the richest of countries is sitting down face to face with some of the last traditional tribal people on earth. That we, the consumers of this earth, are tearing the trees and vines from around their houses, that they do not want this. That at this moment, one timber camp in the Barham is taking out $3.6 million a month of timber and paying for that privilege about 1% or $1.35 to each native of that district. That most of the timber goes to Japan, much of it to plywood forms for concrete, which are thrown away after 2 uses. That the forest will be gone in 7 to 10 years. That the government and companies have no thought for tomorrow in Sarawak. Although Mitsubishi is looking now towards Chile and New Zealand, and last year they bought extensive concessions in Alberta, Canada. We went from Montana to Japan, and from Japan down to Southeast Asia, to Sarawak, North Borneo. Borneo is the 3rd largest island on Earth, in the middle of the South China Sea, north of Australia, south of Vietnam. Sarawak on the north coast is the largest state of Malaysia. It has 1.7 million people, 45% native, 30% Chinese, 20% Malay. The situation in Sarawak is heartbreaking because it's just a matter of greed. Very simple. There are not a lot of landless poor. It's not like Africa and Brazil. There are only 1.7 million people in the country, and there's room enough for the people. It's just a matter of greed. The chief ministers are handing out the timber concessions to local Chinese companies. They're being funded, financed by Japanese banks in Tokyo. The money is not going back into the state coffers to fund development. In Sarawak, it's going into private bank accounts in Hong Kong. So first of all, it's not a complicated tragedy. The natives who are suffering all of the damage from the cutting are getting none of the benefits. That's another reason it's a heartbreaking situation. Let's consider the situation right now upriver in the Barham in North Sarawak. Beyond the logging, these are beautiful, healthy people living a pretty good life by all accounts ever since the great naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace, the competitor with Darwin, came in 1856 and lived with the first Raja of Sarawak and wrote in his notebooks, "These people are the most beautiful people I've ever met, and the food they get from the forest, the meat, the vegetables, are satisfactory for their needs, and they're selling surplus food to the Chinese." Everyone who's been upriver has commented on the beauty of the people. You are not looking at undernourished, starving people who need the help of the Sarawak government. If we stay out of their way, they're doing very well on their own. Now they get 90% of their meat from the forest and from the rivers. Most of that goes with logging. The game flees. The deer in Sarawak will not browse the cut-over forest. The pigs are gone. At Long Son, they told me that 1 cast to 4 casts of the net would get dinner for a family 10 years ago. Now it's 6 hours of fishing to get what they used to get in 40 minutes. They lose half their vegetables, which they glean from the forest. The other half they grow in their own compounds. After the logging has gone through, which takes about 3 years, they have lost not only their meat and their vegetables, they've lost also the wood for housing and for boats. Marathi trees over 2 feet in diameter is what they need to build a house and to build a dugout canoe. The first thing the timber company takes, according to the manager of a timber camp I lived with, is Marathi over 2 feet in diameter, and they'll take them all on the first cutting. People ask me if they get jobs and some benefits from all this industry and development coming in. It's a lot like a pipeline, say the Alaskan pipeline. Here you have a big company coming in saying, oh, look, here's our payroll, here are jobs, high-paying jobs. But in fact, of course, the guys with the high-paying jobs are from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and came up with a pipeline company. And the few people they hire from a local village they're moving through are doing low-end work for a short period of time. It's exactly the same in Sarawak. The timber company comes in and says, we have a big payroll, we pay well, we have a lot of jobs. It's true, those jobs are already filled by permanent workers, most of them from the Iban tribe and from another section of Sarawak, who have come up the Barham with the timber company. A small longhouse of 200 to 300 people may have 2 to 3 boys working for the 3 years the timber company is going through. A large longhouse like Long Son with 1,000 people may have 10 boys working, and mainly at the low-end jobs. Longanop right now is the edge of logging. Samling timber is moving through their lands for the first time right above them on the ridge, and they are blockading the roads and have been over a period of a year, on and on. And the manager of the camp they're blockading said to me, he said, no, they don't want money. They've made that clear. They want us to stay out of their forest. Now, Longanop is, their woods, their forest is worth about $500,000 a month in gross take for the 3 years the company will move through. That is, if you take the amount of land they've got and the amount of acres and how much the company is getting per acre, their territory is worth about $500,000 a month. Or is nearly as we can figure about $100,000 a month pure profit for Samling timber. 500,000 gross, 100,000 pure profit. Okay. The natives in Longanop are being paid $1.35 a month for having their forest cut. But the headman is getting $115 a month in bribes. The assistant headman is getting $58 a month, and the 4 committee members, this is the whole structure of governance in the loghouse, are getting $20 a month. Everybody else gets $1.35 a month, and their forest will be gone. It's really, the situation in Sarawak now is really similar to that of the Native Americans, the American Indians in 1870. The trees are the buffalo. By taking the buffalo away, we took away their economy, we brought the Indians to their knees, they had no other sources of income, they were suddenly dependent on the government, they had to come into the reservations where they could be controlled. Exactly the same in Sarawak. These people have been living wild and free, as we would describe it. They've been living very well, we know, for at least 100 years, because we have the accounts of Europeans visiting them. The forest is the source of all their economy, culture, and religion, just as the buffalo were to the Plains Indians. We are taking away the trees, and that will bring them to their knees. They will have to be in a cash economy, in a cash world. They will be under the control of the government, and indeed they'll be on the welfare rolls of the government. And they will have no way of producing cash in a cash economy, especially since Sarawak is not modernizing. It's simply sending the money offshore.
Dayak tribes such as the Aban, Barawan, Panan, Kilabit, and Kenya have actively resisted the intrusion of the logging companies into their forests. Over 400 Panan people have been arrested since 1987, blockading logging roads in the Ram watershed. 82 Panan were imprisoned in 1989 for 2.5 months at Punjara Prasad Miri. In June 1991, there were over 500 natives blockading at Longajan, despite threats from the police and army to dismantle the blockades. In addition, 8 natives from the Aban and Bukatan tribes from the Tatao area were sentenced in August to serve terms between 6 and 9 months at Miri Prison. The irony is that they were convicted on a criminal intimidation charge, a crime that surely the logging companies are guilty of, instead of these 8 men who leave dependent families to suffer and face the onslaught of the timber company.
Welcome back to the MCAT studio. Again, my name is Storm. I am an Earth First activist with Cold Mountain, Cold Rivers here in Missoula, a guerrilla video collective that assembles low-budget, professional quality videos that deal with eco-indigenous human rights and environmental issues. What you just watched was a segment from an older video Cold Mountain, Cold Rivers did. In fact, it was back in 1992 when that video was produced. It's entitled SOS Sarawak. And as you just saw, you witnessed a very, very poignant resistance on the part of the Penan Dayak people of the Sarawak province of Malaysia to multinational corporate devastation of the rainforest with which they call home. Let us bear in mind that that particular rainforest is a very, very unique ecosystem. There's no other place like it in the entire world. No other rainforest anywhere else in the world, anywhere else in the region, is going to be identical to that particular rainforest. That particular ecosystem is unique, and nobody understands it, nobody recognizes it, nobody realizes that ecosystem as well as the people who live there, namely the Penan Dayak. The Penan Dayak have lived a very, very happy, healthy, sustainable lifestyle there for many thousands of years. As you saw, as the initial explorers and anthropologists who interacted with the Dayak found out that these are very, very healthy people. They're very, very happy people. The forest sustains them, and they recognize better than anybody else in the world the inner workings of the ecology of that rainforest in Sarawak, Malaysia. Okay? It should be apparent to everybody that there's a wisdom within Dayak culture, a wisdom among the Dayak people, based in their traditions, that nobody else on earth possesses. And as these multinational corporations go in there, under the guise of development and under the alleged auspices of providing jobs for what we are supposed to believe is a poor, destitute population, they are subverting the Dayak culture, the Penan Dayak culture, in their efforts at destroying the rainforest to ship it off, export it elsewhere for nothing but profit. Okay? Capitalism is not good for native intelligence, native cultures. Capitalism is not good for humanity because the wisdom inherent in these cultures is something that all of humanity benefits from. Quite a few people have heard the story that came out of Malaysia of a particular tree that the local natives regarded as sacred. The logging companies came in, the natives told them, do not cut this particular tree because it is sacred. Some samples from the tree were taken, research was done in a laboratory, and it turned out that there was an enzyme in this tree, I believe it was in the bark if I'm not mistaken, that was hostile to and destructive toward the AIDS virus. When they went back to find this tree again, it had been cut down. They asked the natives, where are there more of these trees? And the natives told them, we do not know of any more of those trees. That is the only one that we are aware of. Why did you cut it down? We told you it was sacred. Okay? It is very, very apparent to anybody that's paying attention that people who live in these places understand things about those places that nobody else will. Who knows what cures for diseases or what food sources lie and that reside in these pristine ecosystems that humanity ultimately would not benefit from. Okay? We know nothing about what possible diseases could be harbored within some of these rainforests and some of these other ecosystems that could be turned loose if we allow industrial exploitation to go in and turn these places inside out. Okay? So, I spent several years in the late 1980s as a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa, And was teaching at a college there. I taught at the university level. Having a background in atmospheric science and meteorology, I not only taught courses in meteorology and climatology, I went over there with a keen interest in the meteorology and the climatology associated with the tropics, particularly tropical West Africa, which is where I was spending my time. I was in Sierra Leone, a little tiny country in the southwestern tip of the bulge of Africa, about 8 degrees north of the equator, halfway in between, or directly in between Guinea and Liberia. There are about 14 or 15 tribal groups represented in Sierra Leone, most of them rather poorly represented, I might add. And when school was not in session and I was not teaching at the university, I spent a considerable amount of time traveling into the bush, the rainforests, the savannas, the drier forests, and I interacted with a lot of native people in their villages, in some pretty remote places. And one of the experiences that struck me the most and struck me the hardest was one of the experiences that got me involved in environmental activism, particularly from an indigenous perspective. And it had to do with the questions that I was posing to village elders in the upcountry villages regarding the weather and the climate and how things were different. Because already the subject of global warming among scientists was a hot topic, and I wanted to know if the people who lived in these places had any perspectives on things like that. And I found some I got some very, very stunning news for my efforts. A number of elders living in these villages had told me stories about how the nature of the rainfall patterns was changing. The nature of the rainfall. The rain comes in a certain season in Sierra Leone, primarily between the months of May and November. That's the rainy season. You can get an occasional but very rare rain during the dry season. The rainy season usually starts in late April or May, and it generally winds down in late October or November. These patterns have been shifting. The rains have come later. The rains have ended earlier in some places. In other places, the rains have come earlier and the rains have stayed around later. Some parts of the country, primarily the northern half of the country, is seeing a decrease in overall rainfall during the rainy season. Some parts of the country, primarily in the southern half of the country, are seeing a notable increase in rainfall and duration of the rainy season, primarily the southern half of the country, as I mentioned earlier. The common theme that all of these people told me was that all of these changes began when the multinational corporations came in and began liquidating the rainforests and exporting the logs. The Sierra Leonean economy is pretty much totally in the hands of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, and that is why the country is a bloodbath now. Don't let anybody kid you. That is why the country is a bloodbath. You can trust me on that one. I was there. I saw it. Okay? But the village elders all recognized that it was wholesale liquidation of the rainforest that was bringing about alterations in the typical weather patterns experienced over the bioregion in Sierra Leone. One of the most startling effects of these changes in weather patterns was the breakdown in relationships that were happening between tribes. An example of this is you have two tribes that inhabit roughly the same area. One tribe is primarily into animal husbandry, a pastoral lifestyle. Maybe they herd sheep, goats, a small number of cattle. The other one is primarily small subsistence farming. The rainfall patterns are such that the rain fell at the certain time of year which provided the grazing, the grass, which stimulated the grass to grow and provided the proper grazing for the herds that the pastoral tribe depended on for their survival. These same rains also came in certain times and places and watered the crops of the neighboring tribe. Since these patterns have been changing, it's been shifting the ecosystem. It's been changing the ecosystem such that the plants are flowering and growing at a different time. The crops were failing. The ability of the pastoral herds to graze was diminished. And one of the results of this was land wars were breaking out between tribes that had peacefully coexisted for many decades, if not many centuries, because the rainfall patterns were being disrupted by wholesale clear-cutting of the forest. So essentially what we have is corporate neocolonialism, courtesy of Wall Street and the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, affecting adversely the weather patterns over a given bioregion and bringing about geopolitical destabilization and friction between tribal groups that have lived in that area for many centuries. The next segment we're going to go into is interviews with Tiny Man Heavy Runner of the Blackfeet Brave Dog Society. These are a traditionalist Blackfeet Society. The Blackfeet Indians live here in Montana and have lived here in Montana for many centuries, and they have their own perspectives that in some ways are different, but in some ways are strikingly similar to those of the Penaan-Dayak, as we shall see here.
Amoi, kana auch kiesroom, am skapocht. En ze kunnen niet goed, die dood gooien, ik ga het kan. Oh, mijn man. Maar koe, het gedaan. Och, zaken, ik ben niet meer met dat zaken. Oh, mijn man. Spradde piek. Na pochme is tam stap se fosmani se tapik pi of rapik spot ne xnana come was place na poch nam mat skake ko se tapai mo tapai omo moxcho que me dan down like it. Come on, just a poco more, Canadian line. Aqui cai Estou a maquitar que está por dar porra, né? Não que está cuida bem. Que está isso que se está bem. Amo gato do yoga. Me está que mata coisa se doa, que auto escuta cai. Que no cada me está tomando mejor eso que aunque no sabe que está pop que está sasco que ha pito que esto los caracteres sí eso que está mi sasco que llamo mata que está escuché y está pero mi copa chica que Kahtsikaakkääkös. Tahtohko nääpunista pikka muutama. Katsokaa pyöt. Kemikkaa puikka maaksi. Maakitaan näkyssä. Se on mitä pohkinäkitski myönnitsiska. Tommakita pyöt. Katsokaa pyöt. Maki tunnetaan. Kaukistutsi määni ethtää. Anna muomanista itäpi inni kui. Haukin nyt on mimminä, niin hakstamak on inni tai matak. Kun se on se päätä piifinnan. Minnissäkin mua ja aamui. Sitä on kuulipinnan. Mistäkin.
Okay, we're back in the MCAT studio again. My name is Storm. The video footage that you just watched was from another Cold Mountain, Cold Rivers video that came out in 1993. It's entitled Crying Out for Survival, the Blackfeet Indians of Montana. And you just heard testimony from Chief Tiny Man Heavy Runner of the Blackfeet Brave Dog Society, a traditionalist Blackfeet society, secret society that works to uphold and maintain the traditional Blackfeet culture. And the Blackfeet have a very, very close close relationship with the land around them. The Blackfeet are instrumental in the resistance to fossil fuel drilling and the Badger 2 medicine, and they're very instrumental in the wilderness preservation efforts in Montana, particularly where sacred sites are concerned. And Cold Mountain, Cold Rivers has done quite a bit of work with the Blackfeet, particularly with the Brave Dog Society, Tiny Man, and the people that he works with. And I want to mention that one of the most important things that we as activists can do, that we as white environmental activists can be doing, I believe, is to be gathering this testimony from traditional indigenous people, people who understand their cultures, who understand the land that they live in, and how that their cultures and their lifestyle relate with the land that they live in. Okay. In the fall of 1996, I had the opportunity to travel to the north coast of Labrador in northeastern Canada. I spent 6 weeks up there with the Innu Indians, and during that time, I videotaped 33 hours of priceless footage of the land that they live in, the Quebec-Labrador Peninsula, which the Innu call Nitassinan. This means our land in their language, and this includes many hours of priceless testimony from the Innu elders themselves regarding their relationship to the land. The Innu are one of the last Aboriginal hunting cultures left in the world, and probably, very likely, the last Aboriginal hunting culture left on the continent. And their religious beliefs, their spirituality is totally based on the animals that inhabit the ecosystems that they live in. The caribou, the porcupine, the wild Atlantic salmon, the Arctic char, the ducks, the geese, a number of animals that inhabit the area. The Innu are semi-nomadic people, just as the Blackfeet were, and they are completely dependent on the behavioral patterns of the wildlife that live in Nitassinan. We're talking about barrens and secluded woodlands and river valleys and riparian zones and many marshes and bogs and significant wetland systems. Nitassinan is nearly 40% water. It has been under assault since the middle of this century by mining, logging, hydroelectric, and military interests. The military interests specifically represented by NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which has been conducting very, very destructive low-level flyovers over Nitassinan. This is ostensibly part of the North American air defense system to protect us under a Cold War scenario. The Cold War has been dead for quite some time now, yet this military activity has increased. This activity, the mining, the logging, the hydroelectric work, the flyovers and such, has had a direct and detrimental impact on the wildlife and the ecosystems in Nitassinan. This has had a devastating effect on the Innu people and their culture. There is a very, very destructive effort at assimilating the Innu into the white Western mainstream way of doing things. They are not at all congruent with it. The rate of suicide and alcoholism among the Innu people has skyrocketed since they were forced to settle into government housing and have been isolated from their migration routes. And you will see a segment where one of the traditional Innu elders discusses the relationship that these people share with the animals in Nitassinan and how their culture is so heavily dependent upon that. So at this point, we will go into the next segment, which is with the Innu Indians of Nitassinan.
Kajimani Shupunisha Nohmanaka Muguti Content Nasa Minister meets National Shower Chugan Mukoti away she had Mugunation Yonaship. Yavacha Minister Chivet Show is more no one in the thousand. Minister Person as a casual change Nabutum no one chick got the patch magams. And Gunagan Tashaman or Sabina. And not the senior get to Facebook. Kusha Bastion basement pay to a student and then Tashaman 97. Can the base open to you? She didn't take Kusha Bastion. Help it 97. No 18 Gunavish with Nashi, Kajuka Man Bunachi. We stayed to 97 cabbage to a student cabbage and sweet wood no. Buku when away she's in one of the states going to start to meet 11. Have a
Vet du kommer Ha?
Anti-service and Tahun Nocostadia Unita as she meets soon as a Esconasa as meets us. Pegonas meets us, no sugar to us, Pegonas meets us. And with a question that you need us. No, Tennis Ninangati, you need a ship manual, Tennis. Pegos have to meet us as Conosum Tennis. I want to Nagatoni wasn't 10 months ago, and the Simon to us with the Tennis. Can also with the Tennis. As a material and the Schmitzen as Nagan Schmitzen about to a unit. As Kubego on the Schmitzen. As good. And
No more. Kun te puhutaan kahatu, että näette pestoa, kun ne puhutaan kahatu, kun nostamassa kutumaati tuotuotana kahatan te puhutaan kahatan to, kun te puhutaan toimissa kahatu, niin sanoo kahatu sana toimissa. Taka uitinaan to, tietenkin punaisen to. Kun tentää sijoa, että kun näitä niin se koituu isakusta. Tuommoisena on tuommoisena mistä päätevän tää kahtua. Tapaa musta kun tää on suitinut. Tää on se minut. Tää on se vapaasta se minut. Kun tää voi näistä on näitä kun nää kahtua. Sen saavutamme tuoka peitin tauaisuuden peit missä saatte puhutaan niin kahdesta päättynyt niin kun näissä kun tuoisuuden kun se on tuossa kun nuo pääsemään kan sitten puhutaan kun puhuisit tuosta ainakin nostamukään tanssipäin niin suotin tanssit puhuisit kun ei mennä puhutaan tapaa missä ei mennä puhutaan kun Peeta otavana jokana no sitten puhuta ei kahatu kun minä kaji tokusen sen näpe kun minä teen nostamatta suutet minä olen tässä te puhuta kahatu minä sen on nuo päästämä kun minä näitä ei vetä no enää tuossa ei
no se me nada pero entonces nas tumas sa kastunta na joga na ka pokushen muka na se skuma na puna na kana se pokushen muka se na man puna skuma na puna skuma kana se pokushen muka na se kastunta na me sa kan to muka ku mina ande mo atmu te ku kan to ni mo na joga na mina joga tino atti hona kan to ni mo atta ko sa kutse ka betne mo shuna kan so basement te ko sa basement kan so basement te kan.
Welcome back to the MCAT studio. In the fall of 1996, I traveled up to the north coast of Labrador and obtained the testimony that you just saw from one Mary Jane Newey of the Innu Indians. I wanted to clarify something that she was discussing in some small detail there during her interview. She talked about the shaking tent. The Innu are the last Aboriginal hunting culture left on the continent, and they are an animistic pantheistic religiosity. Their spirituality is heavily based on the animals that sustain their traditional lifestyle and culture. I'm talking about the caribou, the porcupine, the ducks, the geese, the char, the Arctic char, the Atlantic salmon. And Mary Jane Newey made allusions to the shaking tent. The shaking tent was a sacred ceremony in which the Innu, through the help of the shaman, communicated directly with the spirits of the animals. The spirits of the animals in the shaking tent would tell them when, where, and how to find the game that they needed to survive. Now, many diaries from both anthropologists and Catholic missionaries gave rather terrifying and startling accounts of their experiences with the shaking tent. They found the shaking tent terrifying. Why? Because they too heard the spirits of the animals. They talked about the sounds of animals in the tent. They talked about the wind blowing inside the tent, almost blowing the tent apart. They talked about the wind blowing outside the tent during the ceremony where there had been no wind before the ceremony or after the ceremony. And they also talked about, in some very startling detail, the amazing accuracy with which the information of the information with which the Innu obtained after their ceremonial experiences in the shaking tent. The Catholic missionaries responded by doing everything they could to destroy the shaking tent ceremony. The last shaking tent ceremony took place in Nitassinan in 1967, and it was revived in 1997 by the Innu as they worked very hard to go back to their traditional subsistence-based hunting culture and lifestyle. Okay? The drum and the shaking tent were very important to the Innu spirituality and their ability to obtain the game that they needed for food and the hides that they needed for clothing and for shelter. Okay? The Catholic Church has made a concerted, sustained effort at destroying their ceremonies because they were terrified by the very, very obvious link to the land that the Innu people enjoy. And it is this link to the land that nobody can afford to lose. The Innu are desperately trying to hang on to their culture. They know things about Nitassinan that nobody else in the world knows. They claim, they swear up and down that if Hydro-Quebec succeeds in damming up the entire Quebec-Labrador Peninsula, which is part of Hydro-Quebec's game plan, that global catastrophe will result. It is nearly 40% water in Nitassinan. 14% of the world's freshwater reserves are in the Quebec-Labrador Peninsula. Think about what it means to have Hydro-Quebec in control of that. You can look at the Innu perspective and understand how global catastrophe can result from such things. The Dene people down in northeastern Arizona on the reservations, on the Hopi Navajo Reservation, they are subject to forced relocation thanks to Peabody Coal and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They also state that global catastrophe will result if the mining companies start tearing out the uranium and the coal from the land that they call home. It's very, very apparent that we cannot just go into these places, commodify all the natural resources, turn the land inside out, and trash the ecosystems for the sake of pure profit when you have cultures that have inhabited those places for thousands of years telling us that there's an absolute catastrophe to be doing this. Traditional Western capitalistic policy has been to destroy any and all who get in the way of these exploitative policies. Genocide isn't just taking place in Iraq, It isn't just taking place in Kosovo and in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Genocide has been taking place on this continent for 500 years. It has been taking place on the African continent for every bit of 500 years. It has been taking place on the Pacific Islands in Southeast Asia for every bit of 400 or 500 years. If we destroy these people, if we destroy these cultures, we will ultimately and very quickly destroy ourselves and everybody else. We are undergoing the greatest mass extinction on this planet's history, greater than the extinction that brought the dinosaurs to their demise, greater than any extinction before then or since then. Okay? We're talking about native intelligence here and the native perspective and the fact that we cannot live without these pristine ecosystems. These are the sources of clean water, clean air, food, shelter, and everything else that we need to survive. I believe it was the Lubicon Cree who said of the white man that once the last tree has been cut, the last bit of water has been poisoned, the last fish has been caught, the last animal has been killed, they will open their coffers and find that their money cannot be eaten. One of the things that the Innu asked me to do when I was up there in 1996 was to archive for preservation purposes all of the footage that I obtained up in Labrador, the Quebec-Labrador Peninsula, particularly that of their testimonies. Those testimonies are in the native Innu language, and they wanted me to preserve them and duplicate them for them so that their children, their grandchildren, and their descendants will have access to those testimonies so that they can hear their elders and their ancestors speak about these issues. The Innu are very, very selective about when, where, and how they speak about those issues. I was very fortunate to be given those interviews. They did not have to open up to me the way that they did. So I believe that it is really, really important for activists to extend this kind of talent and technical assistance to natives around the world that are willing and are receptive to the idea to record them and their land and the places that they live and their lifestyles and their cultures and their stories and their traditions and their songs and their music for hoped-for posterity. That this is a level of wisdom that we can all benefit from, but particularly these native peoples themselves who are desperately trying to hang on to their way of life, to their culture, to the land that they live in, to their own health and vitality, to their own ability to survive and have a living just like everybody else. I want to thank you all very much for your time this evening. You can view this program, Center to the Left, every Sunday at 8 p.m. from 8 to 9, every Monday from 5:30 to 6:30. The Monday 5:30 to 6:30 slot is a repeat of the Sunday night from 8 to 9 slot. And we hope you will tune in again next week, Sunday at 8 o'clock, or again on Monday at 5:30 for another installment of Center to the Left. Thank you very much.